Hello, everybody. Hi, Internet. Mike and Andy here. We're so glad you're with us, whatever day you are listening to this. We are coming at you from the Braille World headquarters of Vox, but usually it's the home office. Today, however, we are coming to you from the master bedroom of the home office, or of the world headquarters in Brea. This is where the magic happens. It's a bit awkward to have Mike and Andy crammed together in our master bedroom with the door shut and locked.
I feel like I'm in the lion's den right now.
I'm
channeling Daniel.
Yes. My wife's more of a cougar, but okay. Andy, as you know, as the parent of a beautiful child with Down syndrome, they can be a bit of a handful. And so Seth Erie, God bless Seth Erie, a week ago, took Nate's, he's our oldest son, he's 13, he took Nate's electric toothbrush, shoved it down the toilet without telling anybody, and it jammed the toilet up, and it overflowed into 3 different rooms, and into carpet, into hardwood floors, and so we, having spent almost $2,500 now, with loads of high-powered fans and a dehumidifier and stuff that whisks away moisture from the floors, it's a bit loud. It's a bit loud down in the home office. The home office was one of the things that got some water in it, which. It's tragic. I mean, let's be honest. Who cares about the bathroom? Who cares about Nate's bedroom that got water in it? It's the home office that is really of utmost importance. So we are coming at you upstairs, locked in a room, hopefully away from the noise of like 8 fans and a dehumidifier and just all sorts of crazy things. So Seth, this episode is brought to you by the letter S for Seth.
Yeah.
Or the letter E for expensive.
Or soaking.
Or the letter S for soaked. Yes, and soaking. So anyway, we're glad to be coming at you. What we want to do is we want to respond to a couple of things that have happened in the last several podcasts. Number one, we did a podcast, I think it was last episode, where we engaged with a young man who we christened Jeremy. And in honor of the Pearl Jam song. And clearly I remember picking on the boy. Seemed a harmless little, that's all the song. But he is 20. He is a gay man. He is a Christian man. And he had some feedback for us regarding an early episode that we did in the Vox podcast. And so we know it's not fair to not have somebody else in the room. But he was gracious to let us read his letter and to respond to it, even though he was not here. And so he wrote another long email, and I asked, hey, can I share this one? And he said, absolutely. So thank you, Jeremy, for this. We really appreciate it. He starts off the letter. So this will be part 1 of what we got to cover today. And then there's another part, and then that may turn into another podcast. So we'll see. So anyway, this is what he says. He says, super awesome Seismic mic, right? Which we rebuked him a little bit because he'd found us during the Science Mic episode and did not refer to me by my self-chosen name of Seismic mic. Right. So now thank you, Jeremy, for making that correction. And the reason I wanted to read this part was so that you could hear his reaction to what we said, even though he's very kind to us. We wanted to give him the last word on that conversation. So just to be respectful. So he just said, just finished listening to your podcast. I was kind of on edge, preparing myself for whatever deep theological arguments you would throw at me. Oh, and we had them ready. Man, we had the deep theological argument cannon aimed and ready. And at the last moment, no, we didn't. He said, I was pleasantly surprised. You didn't accuse me of not being a Christian. You didn't throw out any complex arguments. You were so gracious throughout the podcast. Not something most LGBT Christians and our allies are used to, and I wish more non-affirming Christians were like you. I obviously still don't agree with a lot, and I'm still not convinced that the non-affirming position is entirely consistent, or I wouldn't have the options I do, or the opinions I do, excuse me. But rather than argue against you, I would much prefer to see you argue with those who agree with you and bring them to a kinder, loving place. So I love that.
Yeah, I like that.
So thank you. I'm glad it came across that way. And obviously there is a huge and important place for the theological discussions. Whoops, that was an email. There's and we don't want to minimize the fact that there are deep and very real theological differences between the affirming and non-affirming camps. But I do think that that we go to those first and most often and most frequently and most significantly. I think that the ground has been hashed so many times before. So I'm really glad, my brother, that you didn't feel attacked. He continues. He said, you asked a question at one point in the podcast, something like, if Jesus were to call you to celibacy, would you obey? My answer is yes, I would. I would strive to do the best of my ability to do whatever Jesus asked me to do. As a teenager, after praying the gay away didn't work, I thought that was my only option. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I fell in love with one of my friends in high school. I had never had a real, all caps, crush before. I knew what it was to objectify someone lustfully, or to simply think someone was nice to look at. But even as a gay person, I don't remember wanting to kiss another boy or to show romantic affection until I met this person. I thought, oh, so this is what all my friends feel towards the girls they like. I think the reason for that was, even though I was attracted to other guys, I'd never been exposed to that sort of thing, so it wasn't even in my emotional range, if emotional range is even a thing. I love that. This crush ultimately led me to a deep depression. I totally got pissed off at God and told him off for the curse he put on me, which, is a lot of the gift of sexuality doesn't feel like a gift all the time, right? Biblically, It's a gift, but wow. Heterosexual and homosexual alike. Homosexuals obviously more deeply. So that's a worthy conversation to talk about. Is this a gift or is this a curse? So totally understand that. He said, then I had this experience of the Holy Spirit that answered none of my questions, but the Spirit was just simply present. Before, I had only ever experienced God as an angry accuser. My pastor used to shout faggot from the pulpit, which, there's a classy guy, and I always sort of internalized that's how God is, which, oh, my friend, I'm so sorry about that. I mean, your parents and then this church, God looks a lot like Jesus, and that's good news. He continues, he says, this experience opened me up to the possibility that there was more than one path to choose. I would also like to clarify something a little more about what I said about Jesus. I don't think Jesus would approve of same-sex relationships, but I also don't think same-sex relationships in his day were analogous to gay marriages today. In fact, I don't think Jesus or any ancient Jew had a similar construct to our gay, straight, or bi paradigm. Just thought I should make that clear because I don't want it to appear that I think Jesus' opinions are irrelevant. I just want to take them in context. I believe Jesus is alive today, and as the glorified, victorious Word, I tend to think his human mind has also been glorified and now knows all things. If, however, prior to his ascension, Jesus were to teleport to modern times and learn about the existence of LGBT people and the variety of very different lifestyles we all have, I think he would have done what you and I have done, which is go on a theological journey of our own. I think he would probably be affirming in the end. My own experience of Jesus in my life is that he doesn't like answering any questions in a direct way. Yes, which is when you read the Gospels, that's so like him. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly. Now, I might be wrong. Maybe Jesus has told me a direct answer, and he's definitely not for it. Maybe I just don't have ears to hear it this time. I'm not all that smart, and I'm pretty stubborn, so it's beyond the range of it's not beyond the range of possibilities. But that could be true of non-affirming folks too.
Right.
Man, what a great humble posture in this whole thing.
Yeah, I'd say you're pretty smart. Saying you're not smart, I don't think is consistent here.
Yeah, use some good words.
Yeah.
Use some good words. At 20, man, I liked Guns N' Roses. I mean, that was all I was doing.
Well, that says a lot.
And this kid's like reading. It does say a lot. He's writing like treatises, and so anyway, bro, you're very, very articulate. So thank you for the way that you express yourself, and I just absolutely love it, because I think everybody has to hold the possibility that we could be wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have to hold our opinions with gentleness and kindness, because it is possible that we're incorrect. So I also wanted to say I liked your suggestion about communities where both groups, affirming and non-affirming, can be in relationship with one another. This sounds kind of like Tim Otto's third way position. He's an affirming gay pastor, but also celibate for the sake of his church. And so Tim Otto wrote a book called Oriented to Faith, which I've read. I'm now going through it another time. And it is a very different take on this whole conversation. So I'd recommend it for a perspective that is seeking to transcend the affirming, non-affirming sort of binary thing we've got going. He said, you also made a very good criticism of me. Now, I don't remember doing this because I certainly wasn't intending to be critical of you. I was thinking about this earlier, he says. I was talking to a very close cousin, and we were talking about her brother who just came out as gay to her, and she mentioned in passing that she thought it was a sin, but she loves her brother. Then she asked me if I'm gay, and I immediately tensed up and even got a little angry. I thought, nope, I know exactly where you're going to go with this and what you're going to say, and I don't even need to open myself up to that. I think I was being too judgmental now that I think about it. I do tend to want to separate myself from folks because of their opinions on these things, and that's probably not good, not very Jesus-like. Wow. Well, first of all, I don't blame you for based on what your parents have done and what your pastor has done, I don't blame you for wanting to separate yourself from those that maybe are not as affirming at all, or as affirming as you are. But the fact that you're even engaging with us says you're not living in an echo chamber. So
yeah.
I think it really depends on how a position is held as much as the position itself. So if we're getting life from being right, those are the most dangerous kinds of people. So anyway, and then you said, also enjoyed the podcast episode and also like your podcast on politics, because your conservative listeners will probably not be surprised to know that how they feel about Obama is a wimp-ass version of the disdain I feel for Donald Trump. I say that in Christian love, Jeremy. Well, Jeremy, you've got the last word on this, my friend. Now, obviously, we're going to have, there's so many different nuances, but we're so grateful that there are people like you who are willing to engage with us and to bring nuance, to bring perspective, to disagree. Man, this is how it should go. And so blessings to you. Thank you for listening. A deep theological argument we could certainly engage in, but it's been rewarding to hear your experience only because it reinforces my conviction that the way the non-affirming position has been held and expressed has been absolute death, in some cases literally, to many in the LGBTQ community. And so is it possible, if Jesus held the non-affirming position, which of course is very debated, and you raise questions about that yourself, how would Jesus have held that position? And how would he have treated people that he disagreed with? And we just think there's loads of stuff in the Gospels. And there are scholars that are making your side of the case too, which is, the constructs of gay, straight, bi, queer, the gender identity issues, all of those things weren't known to first century Jews. And so the church is really left to either falling back into its historical position on these issues or to adapt or to find a third way. And so this is thus the craziness of the conversation. So Jeremy, blessings to you. And thank you for listening. We also had the privilege of engaging with our friend Godless. Mm-hmm. And since we haven't engaged with him in a couple of weeks, I've been godless-less, which
would mean
I'm godless,
full of God?
Yeah. God, maybe I'm Godful. Godful speaks. No. So per our the ending of our conversation, Godless got fired up about a couple of things and threw some stuff out there, and I know there were people going, "Oh, come on, you got to respond to that." And we didn't, because the goal was to hear his story and his perspective, and man, if you want arguments, I mean, there are master debaters, and go to YouTube and type in theist versus atheist, and you've got zillions of talking points. What I was more interested in is just the inside story of how somebody goes from being a believer to being, in his words, an agnostic atheist. Or an atheist agnostic, however is best the best way to describe that. But we said towards at the very end, we said, hey, let's give this some thought, and let's respond to it. Now, again, if he's in the room, this is an entirely different conversation, and so I hope that he hears this, and everyone else does in the following spirit. I don't believe that anything I'm going to say is going to convince Godless that he is wrong, and I don't know that there's something Godless could say that would shock me into atheism. And what I mean by that is, I hope we're both thoughtful enough people that have engaged the weaknesses or the perceived weaknesses in our own views. And so we're not going to be super surprised. And so the goal of my responding to Godless isn't to convince Godless that he's wrong, but it's to make other points about how atheists and theists can have conversations. Mm-hmm. And so I want to respond to some of the stuff that he said. And again, it's unfair to do this because he's not in the room. He's speaking off the cuff. And so I tried not to prep much so that this would feel like me being off the cuff too, instead of just writing down a whole bunch of stuff. But there's some stuff he said that I thought, okay, this is good. And I think these objections are held by lots of people, mm-hmm. or at least lots of people are aware of them. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, well, let's spend some time on these. And again, I think we believe things for a whole bunch of different reasons. I think we believe things for intellectual reasons, but I also think we believe things for emotional reasons and prejudicial reasons. And so we can put forth philosophical arguments all day long and just talk past each other. But very often what we're believing is way more complex than that. It's not just, as he was sharing, it wasn't just an intellectual journey, it was an emotional journey, an existential journey as well. And so too would it be if he were to journey back, and same with us. If we were to journey into atheism, that's not just an intellectual thing. There's some deep and webbed together complexity into that. So I want to say first to Godless, dude, you seem totally rad to use Southern California language. And I'm probably 20 years out of date with how I talk Southern California, but I grew up in Ohio. So rad and stoked were kind of the words that were in use out here when I first moved out here. And
the movie Rad probably made its way out to Ohio, and that's what.
No,
okay.
I've never even heard there. I didn't realize there was a movie that was called Rad. Is there really?
Yeah, it's like a BMX bike movie.
Oh,
it rules.
Oh, of course it does.
Yeah.
And in that movie, they drink IPAs, watch hockey. Now
IPAs barely existed.
Oh,
neither did hockey in Southern California, except for the Kings, but that doesn't count.
It doesn't. So okay.
Actually, that was like the pinnacle of the Kings era. So I take that back. I loved the Kings back then. Sorry, okay. Tangent.
Radless. I'm now radless. When Godless. So I want to affirm him for a couple of things. Number one, I love his agnosticism about his atheism. That he doesn't think there's a God, but he doesn't know for sure. But the evidence, however it goes, seems to indicate there is no God. So I love that. And he talked about how two things had really shaken his foundation. This book by Stephen Jay Gould, Hen's Feet and Horse's Toes, which if you're picking out a title for a book, that's not the title you want to shoot for. And then Angus Young, the picture of Angus Young being shown at a youth rally. But that was deeply symbolic of the fact that he was realizing he didn't fit into this thing. So I also absolutely loved how thoughtful he is about spiritual issues. I mean, he spends a lot of time, I don't know this, but he seems like the kind of person who spends a lot of time thinking about, wrestling through kind of some of the big deep questions. So I absolutely love that, and I share that in common. Absolutely, I love talking about this stuff. I love thinking about this stuff. So and even when I said, hey, what are the things that kind of open you up to the possibility that maybe there is something bigger? I mean, I just loved that he was honest and said, yeah, well, yeah, there are things. And of course, in my view, in my heart, there are things that make me go, man, is this really? Are we sure about this?
Yeah.
And so I just love that all of that got out there.
And can I say one more thing too? Like,
yes.
I feel like we definitely got a bit of a gift from him, because he, on our show, he was incredibly graceful and incredibly warm about the entire thing. He went on his show after the fact and said the same things about being on it. That the conversation was warm and honest, and it felt genuine to him. And he is a bit of an entertainer. You hear him on other shows and like he's got a wonderful, fun, energetic posture about his view that is fun to listen to. And all the while, we've kind of been given this other side of him, where he's kind of been vulnerable and unveiled some things to us. And I've really enjoyed that. I've kind of taken that as privileged now that I've listened to it a couple times and kind of heard him on a few other things. So I have to say thank you on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And just to respond to the people who are unhappy with us for either letting him on, which there are some people who are unhappy with us, and or not responding. So it wasn't so much a debate as it was just letting him talk and our asking questions. One of the things that I see so lacking, we had Tim Muehlhoff on months ago, and he was talking about looking for common ground. Well, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're looking for common ground, for crying out loud. You can't do that unless you're listening. And so, see, there's this Christian, I don't know what it is. I've been guilty of it in the past. Just the need to correct everything or to make sure we stand up for the word of God. And I don't know. I just don't see that sort of pressure when Paul is dealing with non-believing audiences. I just don't see that. What Paul does is he looks for common ground. He quotes commonly understood and respected authorities, even though it's an interesting thing to me to have people object to, well, how come you didn't answer this, or how come you didn't answer that? And to go, well, we can get there, but why would you ever start there?
Yeah.
Right? Why would you ever start there? And I'm not convinced that Godless is going to listen to this and go, oh man, you're right. I'm now a believer. I think it'll raise more questions and give him more ammo, and I could respond to that, and then I could go after him, and this could kind of go on forever, and it has, for several hundred years in terms of atheism versus theism. So, all that is to say, here's why I'm not an atheist. All right, and there are loads of reasons. There are emotional reasons. There are cultural reasons. I've always had an awareness of something. I didn't start going to church until probably 9, 10. I went to a church preschool, I think, but I don't remember a time when I didn't believe there was something. And so I bring that to the table, but I've also done some thinking about it, and there are all sorts of great philosophical arguments. But for me, the argument form that I've always most resonated with is an argument form called inference to the best explanation. And it's one of the ways that science does its work. You start with a set of data and you hypothesize about what can explain the data, and then you test the hypothesis and adjust as necessary, because you have the data, and so you infer explanations. What are the things that best explain the data, and then you test those explanations against new data and see what happens. And so I come from a school of thought that calls itself common sense particularism. There is a big branch of philosophy called epistemology, and it's the question of how you know something. And how do we know things? Is it through experience? Is it through rationality? Is it through empirical verification? I mean, is it through intuition? I mean, is it through revelation? I mean, these are all massively gigantic philosophical questions. And so particularism is contrasted with a view called Methodism. All right, and I don't mean like the religious denomination, but there are two ways of trying to settle what counts as knowledge. The Methodist view says, well, knowledge counts if the proper method to achieve knowledge has been used. So this is the scientific method, right? So we don't
that's what I was going to ask.
So the reason we call it the scientific method is because it's a method that we've seen produces knowledge about how the world really works. So it's the method. That's the point. Particularism says it's possible for me to know things without knowing how I know them. Okay, so let me give you an example. I know that I'm the same person this morning that I was last night. Now, can I prove that? Well, I mean, proof in what sense? You could argue that I am the product of a dream of some alien race. You could argue that the Matrix was actually a true story and we're all deluded by the machines.
Yeah.
You could argue that I'm physically not the same person, and all that I am is physical, and so I'm not the same person I was because certain cells have changed. Some have been shed, some have been born, however that works. I mean, you could speculate that in fact I am not the same person I was last night. But I would hold the burden of proof would be on you to convince me that my common sense knowledge that, nope, I remember what I had last night, what I dreamt last night, what time I woke up, that I've maintained a sense of personal continuity throughout my whole life. You could say, yeah, but maybe someone implanted your memories and you were born 2 seconds ago. You could actually make that argument, and some have. And could I refute it? No, but the burden of proof is on you to override the common sense thing I think I know. Correct?
Okay.
So, common sense particularism says, listen, I don't know a lot of things. I don't know how I know a lot of things, but it seems like I know things. Now, you can abuse this view, no question about it. But remember, we're not making an argument that just simply says, well, I know God, so therefore God. I know that God exists. I mean, our Mormon friends make that argument. I've just had this personal experience of God, and they'll appeal to personal experience. No, this is not what we're saying. It's just that we're trying to answer the question, what set of data do we begin with? And then which hypothesis that God exists or that God does not exist best explain the data that we think we know?
Okay.
So, for instance, I think I know that I have some sort of moral intuition. I have some sort of morality. I feel guilt. I feel shame. I feel altruism. I feel compassion. And one of the great boasts of evolutionary psychology is that we can explain how those fit in evolutionary terms. But it seems like even when Godless is speaking, Godless is offended by things. Godless is objecting to God on moral terms, right? One of his big arguments was, listen, God, what's recorded in the Old Testament is awful. And if Jesus validates that,
right,
then Jesus is awful too. And so one of the things that I think I know is that I'm a moral creature. I'm making judgments all the time on myself and other people about right, wrong, good, bad. I think I know that I'm free. That I'm raising my hand right now. Both hands just went up right then, and I had no idea 5 minutes ago I was going to do that. Was I constrained by something in the exercise of that freedom? Am I only the products of the chemical processes that spurred on that, or am I something bigger than the chemical processes and the neurons that are firing and the atoms that are being rearranged and the cells that are, am I bigger than that? Do I exercise some sort of a power or agency over that? When I'm exercising and I don't want to, there seems to be something called a will that's different than my muscles that are crying out, that I can use to override what my muscles are telling me. That seems like so it seems like I have some sort of freedom. It seems I have some sort of sense of morality. It seems like I can think Right? Descartes had this very famous dictum, I think, therefore I am. It seems like that I spend time imagining. It seems like I spend time thinking. It seems like I spend time sorting through what I think about things. So it seems like I'm rational to some degree or another. My wife may take issue with how high a degree that rationality
subjective rationality
extends. It also seems like I fully want to mean something. That I have this thirst for significance and purpose and meaning and worth that's deeper than the satisfaction of my bodily appetites. So it's not enough to get adequate sleep, to be safe in a house, to have sexual release, to eat and to have water. It seems like there's something else that I'm on a quest for that goes by the label of meaning, purpose, significance. So I think I know. I think I know that. I also think I know that evil exists in the world. And that's a different thing than me being a moral person. I think that there are things that happen in the world that are so revolting that if all it is a different expression of evolutionary biology, that I react to it as if it were more than that, right? Mm-hmm. I react as if there's evil, real evil in the world. I also seem to know that there's beauty. Whether it's music or art or movies, nature, there seems to be something that promotes yearning and like calls forth like deep melancholy and wonderment and yearning. That seems to be true. And I also think I know that human beings are incredibly complex. And conscious, like I'm aware of myself, and there's an I that I'm aware of that's different than your consciousness of yourself, and that I've learned in a very lonely kind of way that I can never enter into another person's consciousness, what they're thinking and feeling, and nor can someone enter into mine. So let's say I know those things. Where are those things most at home in a universe that where a God has existed, a personal God exists and has, whether through evolution or some other means, created, designed, purposed, superintended a process whereby those things are at home, agency, morality, so on, so on, so on? Or is it more likely, does it seem more probable, is the better explanation that we are simply matter in motion, that when you die, it's done. There is no soul, there is no spirit, there is no afterlife. We're just merely physical beings. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Godless would say it differently than this. Mm-hmm. But where that data set, where is that most at home? Now, you can quibble with the data set. You can say, well, you're really not free. You're really not rational. You really don't. You're not moral. Mm-hmm. You really don't see beauty. And some people go there. Other people say, well, listen, you can be moral without God. And I agree with that. One of Godless's big objections was, listen, Christians can't have the sole claim on goodness. Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there good people who do not believe in God? Of course. Of course. Yeah. The scriptures say when the idea that of original sin isn't that we're as bad as we could be. It's just that we're not as good as we could be. That everything's tainted.
Right.
And even the best of our actions, there's an echo of death or an echo of selfishness or whatever it is. But for Christians to say that they're the sole. They're the sole and exclusive users of good or beers of good. I don't know that the Bible agrees with that, because the scriptures instruct us to learn from all parts of creation, including people that didn't believe in the one true God. So I don't buy it. So all that is to say, you could quibble with the data set.
Okay, so with what you're saying, just so I follow and so we can kind of maybe represent it. If we're talking about establishing common ground, so to speak, like if we're kind of making a case and presenting where we're working from, if the question would be, is Godless, do you agree maybe that particular data set, could you agree on that you might feel the same way? That you have free will thinking, you maybe feel a call of purpose in your life beyond just primal nature and behavior.
Yep.
What else did you say? Just bullet point.
That the world seems incredibly complex, and it's called the anthropic principle, that there are these cosmic constants.
Okay.
That if they were just a shade off, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And so it just seems like the more we find out about the universe, the more ridiculous it is that life even exists at all.
Sure.
But yeah, consciousness, something called indexicality, which is the fact that I seem like an irreducible I. That I'm an I, and we're not just sharing a consciousness.
Okay. Oh yeah. So like
the
awareness.
Borg.
Yeah. So awareness of your own consciousness, like you said. Like
it's not just that I'm conscious, but I'm conscious of consciousness.
Okay. Right. Okay.
And that there's a me-ness, a me-ness, just to be clear, to my awareness.
Okay.
You but
understand
I'm also
how
aware
you
of
exist in the awareness.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So yes, we could argue over the data set, and our atheist friends could give an account in purely physiological terms of, well, here's why you feel compassion. Here's the evolutionary advantage that compassion produces. Here's why you feel love. Here's what love is. Love is the firing of these neurons. And when you feel love, this part of your brain lights up. Godless could give an account for morality just in terms of culture. It's community morality. You were raised in a Christian, quote, American culture that had a certain baseline set of Judeo-Christian values, and you just incorporated those. That's what your parents gave you.
So that morality is nurtured rather than innate, kind of like as you referenced it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So one thing Godless could do is say, no, I totally disagree with your data set. Right? How do you know we're not? So then the question becomes, well, what's the burden of proof? And that's where you get into particularism versus Methodism. Is it possible for me to know something without knowing how I know it? And or as some empiricists would say, no, it's got it. If you can't verify it empirically, it's not real.
Okay.
And that's the Methodist claim. So it's just an interesting. So Science Mike, we had a great conversation. Well, he's clearly an empiricist. He's clearly a fan of massively a fan of the scientific method. But he's got this personal experience thing, this mystical thing that doesn't quite fit, and yet it's something he knows.
Right.
So, but again, you can say I had an experience of there being no God.
Right.
How do you argue with that? Right. So when people say, or if people ask me, hey, why do you believe in God? My argument is my belief in God makes the most sense of the way I experience the world and the world that I experience. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand how I could have such a revulsion against evil that seems cross cultures. There isn't one culture that values cowardice over courage. They just define courage differently. But there isn't one culture that makes the moral judgment that cowardice is better. There isn't one culture that makes the moral judgment that torturing innocent babies for fun is acceptable. Right? There are some. Now again, we can argue about all the details, but I'm just trying to in general say I come at the God question having a sense of experience in this, that I feel like I've experienced God. I feel like I've been aware of God. But I also come to it with, I think I know things about the world. And the burden of proof for me is on someone giving different explanations of those. And if those things are actually things I know, to me, they're more at home in a universe where God exists than not.
Okay.
So a complex universe, a sense of morality, a sense of consciousness, I don't know that evolutionary theory has given satisfactory explanations of consciousness, for instance. And so that's how I approach the theist atheist. There's an argument called the Kalam cosmological argument, which is Everything that begins has a cause. The universe began, therefore the universe is a cause. And that cause can't be part of the universe, or else the universe would have always existed. The fact that it exists and started at a specific point in time suggests an agent, some sort of personal will existed prior to the coming into existence of the universe.
Yeah.
Right. So there you go. So there's one argument. You could do the irreducible complexity argument by our intelligent design brothers and sisters. I mean, there are other arguments out there, but to me, I'm a common sense kind of guy, and I love the philosophical stuff. But I find inference the best explanation to be the argument form I use to say to talk about Jesus's resurrection. So there are things that I see true historically, and there are things I see true in the Gospels, and there are things that I see that are true that only make sense if there was something like the resurrection described in the Gospels. So that's how I kind of approach a lot of these questions if I'm only dealing with them in kind of the intellectual vacuum.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes. I follow that. Yes.
Okay. So I know every now and again I can pull out some big words.
Yeah, this is pretty entertaining on my end. You're like the common sense guy. I'm just like, I don't know half these words.
Well,
but I'm fine with that.
No. And Andy Bear, see now. So the question that Godless and I would wrestle over is that data set true, and then which atheism or theism, which gives the better account of why those things are there and why they are the way they are. And we'd go from there. So I come at the question of Jesus in the Bible having a prior commitment to the belief in God. So I come at the Bible with just tons of skepticism because the thing's so dadgum weird. And it starts... I have no problem with Genesis 1 and 2. God creates their days, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I don't think the universe is, 6,000 years old. I don't think it was 6 literal days. I think, we'll talk about Genesis another time, but we're reading Genesis in ways that Jews never intended it to be read. But when you get to Genesis 3 and you have a talking snake and fruit, so part of me just goes, okay, really? And then you get God commanding genocide, and then you get God giving some really weird commandments. I mean, just odd. Like, what in the world is going on here? And I see why some atheists will just look at the God of the Old Testament and say, this God is awful and wrathful and weird and schizophrenic, loving and compassionate one day, and then boom, we're going to hit you with a plague.
Yeah.
And wow. And so, and then you get to Jesus, and it's like, Jesus is just the kindest, gentlest, so I get why people really wrestle with that. And that's where Godless started to really kind of go after some stuff when he's looking at the Old Testament. And then he said this, and this is the key move he made. Because when we've talked about Old Testament stuff before, my argument always begins with, listen, the Bible itself says Jesus is the clearest picture of God, that the picture of God in Christ trumps all other pictures, so that any picture we have prior to Jesus is true of God, but not completely true. Mm-hmm. So we get a glimpse of God's wrath. We get a glimpse of God's justice. We get a glimpse of God's compassion. We get a glimpse of God. But Jesus, the scriptures say, is the exact representation of God's inner nature. All right. So that's the one thing that I always say. Well, Godless has picked up on that because he's been graciously listening to us along the way, and said, yeah, but doesn't Jesus validate the Old Testament? And then that led Godless into a critique of the Sermon on the Mount. Mm-hmm. So that's where I want to spend some time. How much time we got, Andy? How long have we been talking?
45 minutes.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Well, I got a whole other thing here to do. Okay, let me just start it, and then we'll end, and then we'll do a part 2.
Okay.
So Godless quoted a verse that, and let me pull out my Bible. Hold on. It's in Matthew 5, and this was the verse Godless was pointing to say, listen, okay, you can't just appeal to Jesus because doesn't Jesus validate the Old Testament? And I'm going to say yes and no. It's more complex than he made it out to be. Now, again, he's not coming at this from a biblical scholar. He's not. So I'm not at all disappointed he didn't have this stuff off the top of his head. Of course not. I mean, I don't have Alistair Huxley or Aldous Huxley and Richard Dawkins off the top of my brain, right? So
and the cultural expectation is like, well, if you're going to be an atheist, then you better have your defenses and have your attacks on at any point in time.
Yeah. So no, total grace. But he's referring to this passage in Matthew 5 where it says, Jesus says, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." So his argument is this, at least from what I picked up. Okay, you can say Jesus is the clearest picture of God and Jesus is awesome. However, doesn't Jesus right there say he came to fulfill the law and the prophets? And so how in the world can you say if the God of the Old Testament seems immoral or amoral, how can you possibly say Jesus is moral if Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount validates the God of the Old Testament? How does that follow? Mm-hmm. That's his question. Now, my big answer, at least one piece of it, is because Godless also referenced, it's called Iron Chariot Wiki, and it is a take on the Sermon on the Mount, point by point. And the sermon is quoted in the King James, which makes it a little easier to kind of take shots at it. But so he referenced that as the Sermon on the Mount is incoherent. It was the failure of Jesus to communicate well what his plans were.
Yeah.
And that was a huge point for him. And also, none of us would really live this way. It doesn't make sense to live this way. It seems like just a jumbled mess. So my big comeback, one of them, is going to be that represents a massive failure to take Jesus seriously as a Jew. And what Jesus is doing here is he is engaging in a one-sided Jewish debate. So it'd be similar to listening to our response to Godless without ever hearing Godless's initial podcast.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
So it would just be hearing our side of a debate without having any idea about what had prompted this whole thing. So Jesus is giving one side of a critique of a kind of Jewishness that he is going to go after. So the Sermon on the Mount is one sermon. It's incredibly coherent, and it is a devastating critique on what the Pharisee branch of Judaism had turned Judaism into. And so he is devastating it. But he first has to disarm his opponents that were accusing him of exactly undermining the Old Testament by giving interpretations that seemed at odds with the prevailing Pharisaic interpretations of the Old Testament. See, I'm going to say Jesus actually does bring correction to some of the Old Testament. He absolutely does. But not correction in the sense of it was wrong, but correction in the sense that it was partial. It was a shadow pointing to a reality. Mm-hmm. So Jesus is actually going to do some genius stuff with the Sermon on the Mount, but he's doing it not as this piece of morality in a vacuum, although I think it stands on its own that way. He's doing it actually as part of a dialogue against the Pharisee view of what it meant to be the people of God. Mm-hmm. And so, because what Matthew does, Matthew's the most Jewish of the Gospels, and Matthew orients his entire gospel around 5 big discourses of Jesus. Now, Matthew's Jewish. What's the number 5 if you're Jew? If you're a Jew, what's the number 5 represent?
I don't know.
Okay, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah.
Okay. All right.
And you're not Jewish, you're Filipino American.
That's
or
right.
Caucasian. How do you say that? Filipino Caucasian. right? It's because American can be anything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
that's not
I'd have to
ethnicity.
say I'm Filipino Caucasian.
Okay.
But then is
Or
how inaccurate
Call
is
Filipino.
How inaccurate is Caucasian as a terminology though? Because
I name it. I claim it loud and proud. In fact, I don't let anyone call me white. I make them call me a Caucasian American.
Total side. It's a hard side note not to go down, but I even feel bad for folks that are white that like Caucasian sums up them too. Because I'm like, well, if you're English, German, and French, like that dismisses all the cultural background.
You know what? Thank you.
Because I am. I'm that's what my Caucasian is made up of.
Clearly,
so it doesn't mean anything.
White men have been underrepresented at the cultural table.
Yes.
So thank you for sticking up for us.
You're welcome.
So back to Sermon on the Mount. So it's unbelievable. So what Matthew does is he takes 5 discourses, and they each represent together. They represent the 5 books of Moses. Now he's not paralleling the individual books, but when Jesus is the Sermon on the Mount, so-called, is because Jesus here is giving his statement of God's purposes in the way that Moses on a mountainside received and delivered the law to the people. Mm-hmm. So Jesus is engaging with Moses on the one hand, but he has in his sights the Pharisees. So even before we get to the sermon, we have to talk about the Pharisees. We have to talk about what they were doing and why they were doing it, and how Jesus in one way was most like them, but because he was most like them, they most hated him because he should have known better. Mm-hmm. So Jesus is going to do a magnificent, it's absolutely brilliant what he does in the Sermon on the Mount. And I think that will go a little way towards diffusing the objection that Jesus just looked at the Old Testament and said, yep, he didn't do that. He was doing something different than that. And it was threatening to the people who looked at the Old Testament and said, yep. So you've got to understand, Jesus is actually doing partially the thing that Godless is accusing him of not doing. And so, because only then do the objections Jesus is countering actually make sense.
Sure. Okay.
All right?
Okay.
So take that, Andy Bear.
Right. I mean, it's in the same. It's like I guess an alignment or an analogy in our modern day is a lot of folks now talking about the racism issue is like white America has to speak into white America to fix the racism of the white side. It's like I hear that commonly. Like you have to come from that to be a solution to it, because it's like trying to
yes.
Like
yes.
Yeah.
Like okay,
you see what I'm
Jesus
saying?
And that goes to the purpose of Jesus. The first purpose of Jesus, and Jesus is really clear about this. When he walked the earth, it was to the Jewish nation.
Yeah.
Right. There were a couple of exceptions that scandalized his Jewish contemporaries, but my goodness, he was so clear. I'm here for the Jews. Mm-hmm. Salvation is from the Jews. And so Jesus came first to correct Israel. And that's why we believe so strongly if he came today, would first correct the church, and correct Israel too. I mean, he's always correcting God's people first. And so Jesus is coming with and this is N.T. Wright. He does such a masterful job at presenting this picture that Jesus is coming with a fresh vision of what Israel should be, which is in alignment with God's purposes for Israel, but due to corruption, the darkness of human hearts, the generations that had gone by, that all of that had been corrupted. And so to some degree, Jesus stands in judgment of how the Old Testament had been working itself out by the time of Jesus. And so he symbolically shuts down the temple. He declares that all foods are clean, even though the Old Testament said, no, some food's unclean. Jesus went after the passage in Deuteronomy that permitted divorce as long as you gave a written certificate for it. So Jesus says, nope, that was actually a temporary measure for the hardness of human hearts. So Jesus he's going after some stuff. Now, again, he's not standing in opposition to the Old Testament properly understood. He's standing in opposition to the way the Old Testament had been worked out in the lives of very sinful people. In the same way, he would stand against the way the church has been worked out in the lives of very sinful people. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
So Jesus comes as a Jew, but you have to understand him as a Jew first. Now, you still may disagree. Godless still may go, man, because he said this. He said, there are parts of the Bible that I simply don't agree with in the moral judgments they make. Okay. Then there's nothing I'm going to say that is going to convince you. except maybe this. Perhaps what you are objecting against is the working out of something God said rather than the thing God said himself, especially held in balance with all the other things that God says. So for instance, back to Jeremy, is it possible to hold the non-affirming view that the biblical ideal seems to be one man, one woman, one covenant, one lifetime, but that every single person has fallen short of that ideal? So because the Bible seems universal in condemning any sexual activity outside of that ideal, and it seems universal in condemning certain kinds of activity even in the ideal. In other words, if I'm lusting after another woman or coveting another man's wife, so if somebody says, listen, the non-affirming view promotes hate, I understand why somebody may say that. And I'm not saying I'm fully comfortable with the non-affirming view, right? I mean, we've said Jesus would critique both.
Yes.
And so there are parts of the non-affirming view I don't agree with. And there are parts of the affirming view I don't agree with. And so I have a tough time putting myself in the conversation as one or the other. But I do insist that people can hold the affirming view graciously and people can hold the non-affirming view graciously. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what needs to happen if we're to do anything to resolve the animosity between the two positions.
Yeah.
So we've got some folks in Vox who hold the affirming view, but they hold the affirming view in a way that makes room for people who don't hold the affirming view. And we've got people who hold the non-affirming view, but they hold it in a way that makes room for the people who hold the affirming view.
Yep.
And last I checked, as people all in process, that's how this has got to work, right? So with Godless, I wonder if some of the critique of the Old Testament isn't the Old Testament as God's heart expressed it, as it would have been revolutionary for its day, in its time, in its culture, versus how it's gotten played out today.
Yeah.
And so that's the one piece I go, well, maybe I can open Godless up to the possibility that the way Jesus has been presented isn't quite the way Jesus was. Maybe the white male-dominated American church who values individualism over everything. Maybe we haven't painted Jesus well, and we need to get back to a more Middle Eastern Jewish picture of Jesus. And perhaps then he may have different objections, but those objections would be truer probably to who he is and who he was, rather than some. So maybe that's the only thing. So Godless, we're going to let you know this is out here, and you know, I'm sure you're yelling at in your home office right now. Beautiful Irish countryside. Birds are now scurrying, flying away because of your yelling. You guys are crazy or misrepresenting whatever it is you're yelling.
Or the fact that we're not done. I mean, this is
this was a long tease for part 2. So anyway, Godless, blessings to you. Jeremy, blessings to you. All of the people who are working out affirming and non-affirming, blessings to you. All of the people that are here who aren't Jesus followers, but you've been willing to stay tuned, blessings to you. And all the people that want to follow Jesus more beautifully, blessings to you. We're so privileged to do this and to be a part of whatever you're doing right now. So signing off from the master bedroom, the Vox home office in Brea, California. Let's do a blessing, Andy. And why don't you do one, man? You never do anything. Just sit there and...
I do things. On the spot, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'll fumble.
You're not?
Nope.
Oh, man. Okay. All right. Well, I got one.
Yeah.
I got one.
Of course you do.
You know what? Yeah, because I'll do stuff on the spot. This is one of my favorites. So this is a verse from the Bible. So you may want to turn this off, or lest you open yourself up to the beauty and power of the Word of God.
The master bedroom just turned into the most holy places upon opening it.
The Shekinah glory came down. No, this one is one of my favorite benedictions. So it comes from Hey Jude. Mm-hmm. Paul McCartney wrote a song about this book of the Bible. It's great. And And it says this. So men and women, brothers and sisters, to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you before his glorious presence without fault and with great joy. To the only God, our Savior, be glory, majesty, power, authority through Jesus Christ our Lord, before all ages, now and forevermore. Amen. Until next time, that was awfully Bible-y. That was awfully Bible-y. But, we couldn't help ourselves. Okay, until next time, bye.
Thanks for listening to Vox, the Mike Geary podcast. Be sure to like Mike on Facebook at facebook.com/official Mike Geary. Follow Mike on Twitter and Periscope at Mike Geary for live interaction and ongoing Q&A. Don't forget to visit subversivekingdom.com for further engagement and information about Mike.